Next, we have Father John Parker. It's a special blessing to introduce him since he is our new dean at St. Tikhon's Orthodox Seminary, just started in September, and we love him and his family immensely already. We're so blessed to have them with us. He previously was pastoring a church in near Charleston, South Carolina, for about 14 years, and his talk is entitled No K-N-O-W, No Catechism, No Chastity, K-N-O-W, semicolon, without those, no catechumen, no catechism, and no chastity. Okay, Father.
Your grace and fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters, Christ is in our midst. I am new to the academic world. I was a pastor in Charleston for 15 years.
Oh my. Okay.
One of my parishioners is here, which I didn't know. It's like a family reunion. Her mama, her brother, her other brother. And so, for example, when I was first asked would I be a part of a roundtable discussion, I thought, well, that'd be lovely. I could do a roundtable discussion. But I found apparently that in an academic setting, a roundtable is a rectangle, and a discussion is a paper. So, since we're mixing up definitions of things, I'll give you my paper, which is defined as remarks and reflections, instead of a prepared address. I'd like to read to you. I don't read well out loud, but when I was asked to come here, I thought of a book from my distant past. I'd like to read you, please indulge me, 3 paragraphs from that book. A many-sided debate about the relations of Christianity and civilization is being carried out in our time. Historians and theologians, statesmen, churchmen, Catholics, Protestants, he didn't mention Orthodox, probably didn't know them, Christians and anti-Christians participate in it. It is carried on publicly by opposing parties and privately in the conflicts of conscience. Sometimes it's concentrated on special issues, such as those of the place of the Christian faith in general education, or of Christian ethics in economic life. Sometimes it deals with broad questions of the church's responsibilities for social order, or the need for a new separation of Christ's followers with the world. The debate is as confused as it is many-sided. When it seems that the issue has been clearly defined as lying between exponents of Christian civilization and non-Christian defenders of a wholly secularized society, new perplexities arise as devoted believers seem to make common cause with secularists, calling, for instance, for the elimination of religion from public education, or for the Christian support of apparently anti-Christian political movements. So many voices are heard, so many confident but diverse assertions about Christian answer, so many voices are heard, so many confident but diverse assertions about the Christian answer to the social problems are being made, so many issues are raised that bewilderment and uncertainty beset many Christians. Sound familiar? In this situation, it is helpful to remember that the question of Christianity and civilization is by no means a new one. That Christian perplexity in this area has been perennial, and that the problem has been enduring one through all the Christian centuries. It is helpful also to recall that the repeated struggles of Christians with this problem have yielded no single Christian answer, but only a series of typical answers which together, for faith, represent phases of the strategy of the militant church in the world. That strategy, however, being the mind of the captain rather than the lieutenants, it is not under the control of the latter. Christ's answer to the problem of human culture is one thing, Christian answers are another. Yet his followers are assured that he uses their various works in accomplishing his own. Thanks be to God. Now, 1951, Christ and Culture, written by the Protestant theologian H. Richard Niebuhr. I didn't go back and reread the whole book for today. Time didn't permit it. But I would encourage somebody here to read it and see how we deal with how he divides Christ and culture and shows the different ways that Christians in ancient times and modern have tried to deal with the question of the interaction of our Lord and where and how we live. He talks about Christ in culture, Christ above culture, Christ next to culture, Christ beneath culture, Christ informing culture, Christ transforming culture. Very interesting. But I thought it was quite appropriate because it's exactly the conference for today. I also beg your forgiveness as I begin. I was not able to be here until after dark last night, so probably all this has been said, but at least you could hear it from me one time, and anything that I invent here today, please forgive me for that. Second thing I would like to note, I would like to do is tell you a story. All I know is how to be a pastor, because for my entire adult life, that's what I've had the opportunity to do. I've been to school many times, and I know how to read a book, and I know how to write a paper, but I don't consider myself an academic. Instead, seeing the lives of people for the last 15 years as an Orthodox priest, and a few years before that as an Episcopal priest, is what informs my perspective. So I'll tell you a story from Charleston, South Carolina. It was the year 2008. I know that because it was about the first month that we were in our brand new and very beautiful building. I'll tell you a little bit more about that if time permits. When a young man from the University of South Carolina came to me during coffee hour, he was visiting Charleston from Columbia about 2 hours away, and he said this. He shook my hand. Hi, Father John. And he shook my hand and he said, I have a quick question for you. And I thought, great, he's going to ask us, why did we build this beautiful Byzantine church? Where did we get our iconographer? You know, how did you get the, how did you make the iconostasis out of reclaimed barnwood from North Carolina? Here was his question. Father John, what is the canonical penalty for fornication? First question, what's the canonical penalty for fornication? I would guess he was about 22 years old. And I thought to myself, good Lord, I mean, couldn't we have started with something like, love your hair, how's your mother, you know? But it points to an interesting, it makes an interesting point with respect to the questions of purity and chastity and integrity and the Orthodox approach to these things, because people who are coming from the outside of the church in, and certain elements of Orthodox Christianity from inside, treat these questions strictly from a moralistic perspective. Strictly. And speaking as one who has mostly a concern for the evangelism of people outside to bring them into our churches, I am concerned that those who are coming in are treated in what I will say is my bumper sticker for my Christian pastoral life. And it comes from Isaiah chapter 42 in verse 3. It simply says that, I'll start with verse 1. It is one of those beautiful hymns of the servant. Behold, chapter 42 begins in Isaiah, behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry or lift up his voice or make it heard in the streets. And here's the pastoral verse, which is for me, and I urge it to be for you from this day forth and forevermore. A bruised reed he will not break, a dimly burning wick he will not quench. And it's very important for us when we are fighting the battles that face us, not to extinguish dimly burning wicks. I think it's the easier of the two to consider. A bruised reed, maybe many people haven't even seen a reed, much less a bruised one, but if you come to Charleston, South Carolina, you can see some beautiful seagrass and you'll see how that works. But every one of us in the room knows about the vigil lamps that are hanging all around and what happens when the wick is not trimmed well and the oil's barely getting up there and the flame is so light that all you have to do is this and it goes out. That's the world right now. The world appears differently. In my opinion, it appears differently because the world is a gigantic teenager. It is. It's a gigantic teenager right now. And so it asserts itself boldly, but underneath is simply completely broken, bent reed. And so as Orthodox Christians, considering those especially who are coming from the outside, we have to keep that in mind. The affront that comes from the voice and in the paper and in the arguments, it's true and it's real and we have to accept it, and at some level we have to deal with it on, as it comes to us. But we have to remember constantly, and maybe with a beautiful southern word, I'm seeing Curia Frederica nodding her head, like, bless your little heart. Like, we have to keep that in the back of our mind. Don't say it out loud. Where we say, I hear you, but we understand more deeply what's going on because there's a spiritual problem underneath all of that. So, a word about dealing with the question of purity and chastity with respect to those coming towards us. It's so important to remember those words of the prophet Isaiah. I hope they will ring in your ears all the more when you hear them in church during the Lenten season, since we read the prophet Isaiah during that time. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not quench. Now, Dr. Bradshaw, you took some of my thoughts. I'm sad. I often like to go last so I can put everybody's thoughts together and kind of piece it together. However, I should have asked to go first today because you all have been talking about all the things I wanted to say. I also looked at that beautiful word agnos that we have as a combination of purity and chastity, and I thought it was very interesting as I was looking at it. It comes in two different definitions. The first one is the one that we know right off the top of our heads. We've heard it already. It means pure from carnality. That's a very bodily definition of agnos. Pure from carnality. It means chaste, modest, immaculate, clean, no stain. All right? On the other hand, it's a much more inspiring definition, which is exciting reverence, venerable and sacred. And I think that's the aspect of beauty which you were describing, and it's what we saw even in the building of our beautiful church in Charleston, South Carolina, where on the one hand, Archbishop Dimitri of blessed memory, when he came to lay the cornerstone for the church, he said this beautiful sentence: this little piece of acreage, 0.6 acres in Charleston, South Carolina, is removed from the thorns and thistles of the world and reclaimed for paradise. Isn't that beautiful? Removed from the thorns and thistles of the world and reclaimed for paradise. And then, by God's grace and miracles, you can ask the Berg and the Presbytera about how this happened. A church was constructed in which every single visitor from 2008 until 2019 when I left, which is 11 years, every single one, with only one exception, said wow 2 times when they walked in. They walked in and they said, wow. And then they turned and they said, wow. Only one person didn't because he was an iconoclast. But that's another story. The conversion of the beauty of that place was so critical and so captivating. We said even before we designed the church, we said those beautiful words from the gospel, if we were silent, the very stones would cry out. And so when the people came into that church, we did our best to be quiet because the stones spoke better than we did. to the result of many people coming to the faith, including one I'm thinking of right now, who learned of our architect because he was rebuilding a house. He was the neighbor to her. And she saw his name and came to the church to see his architecture, walked in, was drawn immediately to the iconostasis, wept at the icons, and never left. She came to look at a piece of architecture, and she became an Orthodox Christian. That's beautiful and amazing and good and important. However, I encourage us to, as much as I encourage us to build in beautiful architecture for what that does, for those coming from the outside in, not just for the glory of God, which is our immediate effort, but to remember those words from Archbishop Dimitri when he said, "This little acreage is reclaimed from the thorns and thistles of the world and restored to paradise." Think of that sentence for people, not just for stones. The stones are only a reflection of you and me. It's not the other way around. That is, we are coming from that brokenness in the world and being restored to paradise. Now, forgive me, I mentioned that I would give you some comments and remarks, and so that's what I'm trying to do, and I'm a little bit scattered in all that. I would like to now turn to the actual title of my talk by way of saying this. In the 1980s, I had this amazing Episcopal priest and his wife. They were wonderful influences in our life, and they had a bumper sticker on their Volvo, and on there it said, "N-O, Jesus, N-O, peace. K-N-O-W, Jesus, K-N-O-W, peace." Right? That's where I titled my title today, and that was the Matthews Greens. Father Gregory was my priest when I was a boy. I was, yeah. Isn't that amazing? So here's the thing, brothers and sisters. It was mentioned already. Father Chad began to mention it. And that is, our people are largely ignorant. I hate to say it so bluntly, but it's just the case. We have to acknowledge that. And the world is a stream that's flowing 1,000 miles an hour, and they spend this much time in church and this much time in the world. We just have to acknowledge that. And that's all the more true, I'm speaking for our children, all the more true for our children. It already started when I was a school teacher in 1994 at the Shipley School in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. There were already like a little triangle that was put on a window, which meant that was a safe place for homosexuals. Now, we have to remember my motto, right? My motto. A bruised reed he will not break, a dimly burning wick he will not snuff out. This is not snuffing or breaking. But the point is that it's already gone on for quite a long time. It's not new today. But what's new today is that, you know, we hear about little children coming home and expressing about two moms and so forth, and how do we deal with that? This is a complex question with respect to teenagers because the tide is strongly against us. At the School of the Arts in Charleston, a public magnet school, this is the norm. Like, to be a teenage boy interested in a teenage girl is not the norm. Today, prom house. Do you know what a prom house is? A prom house. It used to be you would go to prom. Remember that? You get a date, you go to prom, you go home. Sometimes you'd have to stay out extra late if you went to prom. Then there's such a thing as a prom house, which is, or some people stay out all night and watch the sunrise. Then there's the prom house, which is rent a house and stay there after prom with all of your friends. Understand, let the reader understand. Then it was go to the prom house instead of the prom. So what do you do when your child comes to you and you are an Orthodox Christian and he says, "Can we have a prom house?" Well, with respect to catechesis, one word we have to know, you repeat after me. No. I don't know if you were telling me no or if you're repeating after me, no. But we have to offer no with an alternative. And that's important because, you know, if you excise a certain demon and you don't put something in its place, then 7 more, even worse, will come in. I one time told my son, "Sure, you can have a prom house." And he said, you really? Like, my Orthodox priest dad said I could have a prom house? Yes. So he says, He says, what's the back draw? Our children never learned that drawback was the word. Somehow they got back draw. We never corrected them because we liked it. He said, what's the back draw? I said, I'm the chaperone. No problem else. So how do we deal with those situations? Well, especially because if you come back to my earlier point, which is the world as a teenager, how do teenagers live? They live according to their feelings. You can hear this in their words. This is pervasive now. My kids hate it when I talk about this. I feel I saw that guy at the movies yesterday. I feel like I saw that person so-and-so. I feel like I ate this before. No, you don't feel like that. You believe that you ate this before. You recall that you saw him over there. But it's not just a silly language issue. It's a serious one, in my opinion, because it's all about feelings. And I'm sure Father Peter in his talk about the Orthodox ethos will talk about this. When we are trying to teach ourselves and one another about apathia, like leaving behind the emotions in order to focus on our Lord Jesus Christ, how do you do that when the whole world is a teenager and everything is about a feeling? It's why marketing works so well for our children. Did I go over my time already? 2 more minutes. Goodness. All right, now I'll talk about catechesis. I recently studied at St. Vladimir Seminary and earned a Doctor of Ministry, and my topic was on the adult catechesis for adult converts to Orthodoxy. And I would like to suggest this for you, for all adults coming into the church, and for all our children. We don't need to know the dates of the 7 ecumenical councils. We don't need to know about the uncreated light. We don't need to know about all of that stuff in order to become a Christian. I'll be just blunt about it since I only have 2 minutes. Those are important things. It's very critical to our history. But our people, including our children, need to know the creed, the code, the services, and the scriptures. The creed, the code, the services, and the scriptures. Creed, Nicene Creed, the basics of the faith. The code is just a fancy way to say the moral teachings of the church. Creed, code, services, how we worship and why, and the scriptures, where all that comes from. The challenge in our past is that, well, it's not a challenge. The way it was done in the past, when a person came to the Orthodox Church in order to become a Christian, they were taught first the moral teachings, including that you could not be enrolled as a catechumen unless on the first day of Lent, with your sponsor present, your sponsor testified to the bishop that you already had changed your moral bad behavior. After that testimony, then you could come listen to 40 days, 3 hours a day of the scriptures being taught in the church by the bishop. Then you would learn what the services meant after you were received in the church, right? Having heard the scriptures all those times. I only urge this one thing: turn it slightly around so that we teach the creed and we teach the scriptures. Scriptures and creed, you put them in the order that you want. Who is Jesus? Why did he die? How did he live? To what does he call you? Then after that, we can teach our people, and here's how to live as a result of that. Because I think in today's culture, if we just come in and say, we don't do that, it's bad, it's immoral, that's not right, they're just going to hear one more moralism. And while it's true that it's not bad, and while it's bad and it's not right and it's immoral, all those are all still true, but we have to teach them why they're true first, and that could inspire them to right living. That is equally true for our children, as it is for our parishioners, and as it is for those who are coming in from the outside. So I urge, and I'm sorry for such a long introduction, I urge a radical return to the ancient form of catechesis, where we lay aside the deeper levels of discipleship and further the Masters of Divinity level instruction that we're giving to adult converts, and get back to the basics: the creed and the scriptures and the services, and then how do we live? Thank you.